بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I am going to talk to you today about Islamic epistemology. Epistemology means the philosophy of knowledge. Islam has got its own epistemology. And then I will talk about the integration of knowledge. This means integrating knowledge of naql and the knowledge of naql. Let us see the overview of the presentation, then we will go into details. Islamic epistemology recognizes two sources of knowledge, ilm al-wahy, which is revelation, or ilm al-naqli, and this is highest in quality. The other source is human empirical experience, ilm al-qawn, or ilm al-aqli, or ilm tajribi, which is more in quantity but less in quality. Ilm naqli and ilm aqli have got the same source from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ilm naqli is brought to us through the messengers, prophets, rusul and books, and ilm aqli is through human intellect and human experience. The two sources of knowledge, ilm naqli and ilm aqli, are complementary. They are not opposed to one another because in a sense they are from the same creator who has got two books. There is Kitab al-Wahy, the book of revelation which conveys ilm naqli, and then there is Kitab al-Kawn, the book of the universe which contains ilm aqli. The two books must be read together to ensure maximum benefit in solving our practical problems. Another point of overview is about epistemological integration or integration of knowledge. This means using both aql and naql to develop knowledge. Solving problems of duality requires this integration because the ummah has been suffering from this problem for a long time because the education system is divided into two. There is the Islamic traditional education, and then there is the secular European education, and the two are different. So we have a problem of two systems of education, two systems of knowledge that run parallel to one another. We need to integrate them. Now, ilm aqli and ilm naqli are the same essence, the same truth. So there is no contradiction between the two sources of knowledge. When there is any contradiction, it's not real, it is apparent. It is either because the human observations that are used to get ilm aqli are not perfect, or it may be failure of the intellect to understand aqli or to understand naqli sources of knowledge, or sometimes incorrect transmission of ilm naqli if it is transmitted incorrectly. But in a sense, ilm naqli and ilm aqli have to agree together. It so happens that there are some things for which only ilm naqli is the source. We cannot get them from ilm aqli. Things about morality cannot be obtained from experimentation or from human observation. This is because humans have got limitations in observing, and they have got their own biases. Now let us talk more about ilm naqli. Ilm naqli is transmitted knowledge or revealed knowledge. This is knowledge from divine sources from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Usually it comes through a prophet or the books or scriptures, al-kutub. The sources of ilm naqli that everybody agrees with are the Quran and the Sunnah. Quran is the primary source and Sunnah is the secondary source. There are other sources of ilm naqli, but these are controversial. Not everybody agrees. There is no unanimity on them. Things like ilham, direct inspiration, ru'ya, dreams, kashf. So these are claimed to be sources of ilm naqli, but not everybody agrees about them. So we just have to leave them as they are. The Quran, which is the primary source of our ilm naqli, has been protected in its present textual form for more than 14 centuries. The Sunnah was written down later on, and it was organized in a systematic way in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. And there is a special discipline of ilm al-hadith to make sure that the Sunnah is checked to be accurate, to be graded, to be reliable. So we can talk about hadithun sahih, which is the highest level, hadithun hasan, which is the next one, hadith mutawatir, hadith mursal, hadith da'if, hadith mawdu'. So Sunnah does not have the same purity of transmission as the Quran. Ilm naqli in the Quran can be direct, ayatun bayinat. You understand it as you read it. But some of it is mutashabihat, allegorical. They require aql, they require intellect to analyze, understand them, and this process is called ta'wil. Verse of the Quran cover many issues of aqidah, issues of ahkam, issues of the realities of the world, history, and current things, and things that will come later. The empirical verses of the Quran, ayat kawniyya, talk about observing the environment around us and also in our own bodies. Quran says, fi anfusikum, in yourselves, and the physical environment around us, fil afaq. And Quran definitely is the primary source of ilm naqli. Sunnah is a secondary source, and Sunnah explains the general principles of the Quran. There is no contradiction between Sunnah and Quran, and any apparent contradiction may be to factors that have to do with understanding or the way of transmission. But if there is any apparent contradiction, the Quran predominates. The term aql is employed in a different meaning from what we are discussing in this lecture, and I just want to make that distinction clear. Aql is part of the essence of a human being. So the word aql and the word nafs and the word ruh and the word qalb, the word nasiya, lub, dhihin, they are expressions of the essence of the human being. But in our presentation, aql is used in a different way to refer to ilm aqli, which is the product of human reasoning when it's called rational knowledge, or is the product of human observation and experimentation when it is called empirical knowledge. The Quran actually encourages us to think, at-tafakkur, and many verses encourage us also to observe the universe, at-tadabbur, at-tabassur. The Quran calls us to use evidence-based knowledge, hujjiyat al-burhan. Then this is necessary for the growth of empirical knowledge. The Quran also talks about sababiyya, causality. Phenomena have got a causality. It's the purpose of research and science to discover the causal relationships. Islam is a practical religion. Iman, or faith, becomes complete only when manifested in actions. But also actions reinforce the Iman. This reinforcement of empirical and the faith is manifested in the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Ibrahim was searching for God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He looked at the moon, it disappeared. He looked at the sun, it disappeared. He said, no, this cannot be God. Eventually, he was guided to the one and true God through this observation and what we can call experimentation. Another story again related to Ibrahim alayhi salam was that he asked Allah, Arini kayfa tuhyi al-mawta. Show me how you bring back the dead to life. Allah told him, Awala tu'min, don't you believe? He said, Bala. He said, I believe. وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. I want my heart to be calm. So Allah made him do an experiment. He told him to get a group of birds, kill them, and break them up, and put parts on a different hill, and then call them. يَأْتِينَكَ سَعْيًا. The birds came back to him. So Ibrahim saw in a practical way the bringing back of something from dead to life. So this tells us that there is this mutual reinforcement. Now in the Quran, ayat kawniyya, which are Quranic verses about the physical world, talk about ourselves as human beings, al-anfus, and also talk about al-afaq, the environment around us. And these verses encourage empirical knowledge, they encourage research, they encourage thinking. So the Quran actually is a book that encourages a lot of scientific exploration. The word ayah means sign, sign of the majesty and power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are two types of ayah, of verses. There is ayat Qur'aniyya. When we read the Quran, we see verses because of the intellectual power, we get convinced about the existence of a powerful God and Creator. But also the ayat kawniyya. When we look at the world around us, the animals, the plants, the oceans, all of these are also signs of the existence of a powerful Creator because they couldn't create themselves. So ayat Qur'aniyya and ayat kawniyya are both from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we need to read both of them. The early Muslims had actually the spirit from the Quran of evidence-based observational knowledge, and that is why they made a lot of progress in science and technology. The problem is when they got in touch with the Greek philosophy, they were hampered in their development because Greek philosophy was more hypothetical. It was not very experimental as this Quranic spirit. Now, we did benefit as Muslims from Greek science, but also there were negative things that came into our society and made problems even in the Aqidah. Among Muslim thinkers, there were those who, influenced by the Greek ideas, started emphasizing rational knowledge more than revealed knowledge, and there were a lot of debates about aql and naql, and there were debates whether aql and naql were contradictory to one another. Next. So this contradiction is actually alleged, it's not true. Aql and naql cannot contradict one another. The debates went on for a long time until they were settled by Imam Ahmad ibn Taymiyyah. Next. Imam Ahmad bin Taymiyyah argued that there is no contradiction between aql and naql, and that he used rational arguments and the Quran to make his point. He looked at ilm aqli mostly as rational knowledge in his arguments, but today we know that ilm aqli actually is more of experimentation and observations. So he wrote a book that laid out these arguments, and his conclusion was that, next, sarih al-ma'qul, the obvious aql knowledge, does not contradict sahih al-manqul, does not contradict naqli knowledge that is correctly transmitted. But I think we can reach the same conclusion from the Tawhidi paradigm. If all knowledge is from one creator, it cannot contradict one another. This is the book of Ibn Taymiyyah in about 6 volumes. It's volume 2, volume 3, volume 4, volume 5, volume 6. It's a big book, and it made the point that aqli and naqli cannot be contradictory. So the Tawheed episteme is that Allah has got two books, Kitabul Wahy and Kitabul Kawn. Now we need to read the two books in order to get correct understanding of the world. Allah will punish us for not following Kitabul Wahy, because that is correct and true. Sometimes Kitabul Kawn we may make mistakes in our observations, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very kind. Now, Ibn Taymiyyah made many arguments about aql and naql if they are apparently contradictory, and he explained how to solve any apparent contradictions. It's clear that there is no real contradiction, but there can be apparent contradictions. Now, ilm naqli has got certain exclusive roles. Things about morality and ethics, about future events, we can only get them from ilm naqli and not from ilm aqli. This must be very clear. Now, ilm naqli also provides guidelines for ilm aqli. It provides the guidelines of purposiveness, using evidence, hujjat al-burhan, and looking for knowledge that is useful, ilm al-nafi', and objectivity, al-istiqama. These are from ilm naqli, but they are necessary for ilm aqli to make sure that it reaches correct conclusions. The Quran lays down basic principles that the researchers and the thinkers can use in developing ilm aqli. We feel that in the modern times, when we talk about ilm aqli, we basically talk about empirical research. A long time ago, it was more of rational reasoning out things, but now it's more of empirical research. It's imperative to integrate knowledge. The problem of the Ummah today is that we have got two parallel education systems. One traditional Islamic and one secular and Western. So it becomes very difficult to give knowledge to our children in a holistic way. We need to find out how to integrate the naqli and aqli aspects of our education system into one holistic curriculum. And this is what we call integration of knowledge, or IOK. The main problem of Muslim education all over the world is this problem of duality or dichotomy, as I said before, having two education systems, because these systems have got different worldviews, and the worldviews are contradictory, which causes a lot of intellectual contradiction and confusion. The elite of the Ummah is divided because graduates of the traditional Islamic system cannot communicate with graduates of the modern European education system, because they speak different languages, they have got different worldviews, they have got different methodologies and different approaches. Those who attend both systems of education have got a split mind because they have got contradictory worldviews. These are problems that we need to solve by integrating knowledge. Integration of knowledge requires that we integrate the schools in the early stages, that in the early stages of education we teach Quran and Hadith alongside other disciplines of knowledge. It also requires an integrated curriculum at later times, that when we teach the disciplines of knowledge, we use both aqli and naqli sources together. And when we start doing research at high levels of education to develop new knowledge, again, we need to integrate the Tawheed epistemology in the research methodology. Because of the importance of integration of knowledge, we have a project that is going on in several parts of the Muslim world to develop teaching materials that have got integrated knowledge. And I want to show you some of the books that have been published about this integration. This is a book on financial accounting published in Bangladesh. It has got conventional and Islamic approach. This is a book on fundamentals of finance Again, it has got the conventional and the Islamic approach integrated together. This is a book on financial markets. This is a book on marketing. This is a book on total quality management. So you can see that all disciplines of knowledge you can integrate between what is naqli from Quran and Sunnah and what is aqli from human knowledge and experience. And these books are proof that this can be done, and actually these books are used to teach in universities. This is a book about Arabic communication. This is a book about the family institution. This is a book on the history of Islam, a book on legal theories, a book on value education, readings from Shakespeare from the Islamic perspective. Shakespeare is a book of English literature, but then you can read it with an Islamic perspective. So this is also integrating. This is principles of accounting, creative thinking, concepts of creative thinking being derived from aqli and naqli sources and integrated together. This is a book on English literature in the 20th century, again from the Islamic perspective. We integrate the Islamic epistemology into the study and analysis of literature texts. This is the Islamic worldview, trying to clarify that Muslims, we have got a worldview, and this worldview should be reflected in our epistemology and in our education. It's knowledge and civilization in Islam. This is a book on ethics and fiqh for everyday life, and this is a book on Islamic values in poetry, knowledge management from the Islamic perspective. This is about IT, information technology, and how Islamic epistemological concepts can be integrated into this discipline. This is again a book on accounting and Islamic banks. This is sociology and anthropology, the Islamic approaches to understanding society and its development and its behavior. And this is a book on Islamization of knowledge in English literary studies. Thank you very much for listening to me. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.